Hello and welcome to English Literature with Susan. I'm here with the third part of the Wasteland. I have already explained the first and the second parts of the poem, and now we are in the third part. The third part is the longest part of the poem, and it constitutes a series of narratives in which the poet talks about lostfulness. As a reminder, I just tell you that in the Wasteland, the problem is that the people cannot bring children into this world. The reproduction issue is why the wasteland continues its existence. And in the second part of the poem, we read about one of the reasons of this betrayal and lack of faithfulness and loyalty in the marriages. In the third part, it changes into lostfulness. So not only betrayal is a problem, lostfulness is again, let's say, and lust is of course one of the seven deadly sins, and lustfulness shows or is a marker of imbalance. So there is not a balance in the passions of the two parties, and the relationships are not based on the goal, or they are not oriented towards the goal of having children. Because in many lustful relationships, the relationship is not a steady one, and one or the two parties are not prone to continue the relationship into a long-term one. So the problem comes with lustfulness. And the title of this part is also, like the other parts of the Wasteland, an allusion to one of the sermons of Buddha. The Buddha preached a fire sermon. So this is the title, against the fires of lust and other passions that destroy people and prevent their regeneration. Here, by making reference to Buddha, we have another point to care about, and that is the possibility or the existence of an alternative, which is related to the Buddhist tradition or to Oriental mysticism or something. So and we have to this in mind. Till this moment in the West, not everything is happening in the West, especially in the Unreal City, uh, whose reference till this part in the poem is London. But what we see that T.S. Eliot is extending the wasteland, and in the fire sermon, he shows that kind of interest or let's say tendency towards moving to other parts of the world to see whether they can or the other sets of beliefs can provide a solution to the problem of the wasteland. This part begins with a series of images related to the end of the season or end of the summer in London. So it is the beginning of the autumn, therefore the wasteland. And summer, formerly 19th century, for example, or even 18th century, was a time in which the people gathered together and in the mansions in different parts of the country, and many marriages happen at the time. But we see that the season is over now, but no marriages. The rivers tent is broken. This means that we have a flood, and don't forget that we are in the wasteland again. And in a wasteland, there is either no water or there is too much of it. So water can kill. The last fingers of Liv catch and sink into the wet bank. This is a personification. The wind crosses the brown land unheard. So the wind doesn't have a sound. This seems kind of, uh, let's say, unrealistic. Or again, another symbol of the wasteland. The wind cannot make noises, so the wind cannot do what it is a task of the wind to gather the leaves and things like that, and then put them into the soil so that they can have a new life in the spring. The wind crosses the brown land unheard. The nymphs are departed. The nymphs here is a metaphor for pretty girls. The nymphs are departed, sweet Thames run softly till I end my song. This line is an allusion to Edmund Spenser's poem Prothalamion. This was the refrain of that poem. Edmund Spenser wrote two marriage songs, Epithalamion and Prothalamion, and sets established actually a tradition for writing marriage songs. And this line is the refrain from Prothalamion, which was originally a poem written for the occasion of his own marriage. So back then, at the time of Spencer, at the time of Queen Elizabeth, and there would be another reference to Queen Elizabeth in this very part of the poem. Back then, the people got married, but now we see that the marriages are not happening. So the names are departed, so no marriages. The river bears no empty bottles, and there are no kind of water pollutions where because the people are not around the river bears no empty bottles, sandwich papers, silk handkerchiefs, cardboard boxes, cigarette ends, or other testimony of summer nights. The nymphs are departed, a repetition, and now we're back to the story. So it was like a digressive point or digressive just expression, and then we are back to the story. The nymphs are departed, and their friends, the loitering heirs of city directors, the sons of city directors who have enough money, therefore they don't work and they are loitering, wasting time with their father's money, departed, have left no addresses. And that is the point. There is no conversation. Once again, we need a conversation, a dialogue, an address in this case, so that the girl and the boy would be connected. And therefore, as a result of it, regeneration would happen. By the waters of Leman, I sat down and wept. And here, once again, the speaker of the poem, most probably T.S. Eliot, is back and he's just referring to himself as I. T.S. Eliot has written the majority of the poem while he was in Geneva, Switzerland, and by the Lake Geneva or the Leman, he had actually experienced a state of homesickness. But it seems that again we have the extension of the wasteland, and this sentence itself is originally an allusion to the echo or an echo of the exiled Jews mourning for their homeland. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down. Yeah, we wept when we remembered Zion. So they were also the Jews were also homesick because they were not in their own land. Sweet Thames, run softly till I end my song. And because this line was first originally a refrain, here T.S. Eliot also uses it as a refrain. Sweet Thames, run softly, and an incremental repetition, a repetition with an addition. Sweet Thames, run softly, for I speak not loud or long. What at my back, in a cold blast I hear, the rattle of the bones and chuckle spread from ear to ear. Here we have a reference to Andrew Marvell's to his coy mistress. In that poem we read, but at my back I always hear Time's winged chariot hurrying near. And here we have a kind of distortion of the words or the images. But the point is that he's reminding us that we're in wasteland and even time is not passing, maybe. And in this part, he continues that previous voice. If you remember, I have already explained that in the wasteland we have layered and multiplicities of voices, and here the main speaker of the poem is most probably speaking. A rat crept softly through the vegetation, and this is a reference back to the unreal city, to the wasteland, to the Fisher King's land. A rat crept softly through the vegetation, dragging slimy belly on the bank while I was fishing in the dull canal. So he's talking about the Fisher King, and also he's talking about about just a man who is fishing. So both of them, maybe the narrator or the speaker of the poem is fishing, or it is the Fisher King. We cannot talk for certain. On a winter evening round behind the guest house, but he gives us an address or a location somehow based on other references we know is in London. Musing upon the king my brother's wreck, and on the king my father's death before him, the Fisher King or the speaker is also talking about Shakespeare's The Tempest, and this is not the first time we have a reference to this play, The Tempest, because in The Tempest, death by water had happened. Okay, just remember this very line. We are going to move on, and later on, we are going to be back to this part because there would be some digressions from here on onwards, and then we will be back to the line in the play, Shakespeare's play, which comes just after this line. And we know that we are just continuing this part of the story. So let's read this intermediate part. White bodies naked on the low damp ground, another reference to the wasteland, and bones cast in a little low dry garret. You can see the whole image here. Rattled by the rat's foot only, year to year. So this is the only sound maybe heard in the wasteland. But on my back from time to time I hear the sound of horns and motors, which shall bring Sweeney to Mrs. Porter in the spring. Let me just finish reading this. Well, no, I can explain this. This is another allusion to Andrew Marvell's famous poem to his coy mistress. But at my back, I always hear times being a chariot hurrying near. And here, in the chariot is changed into a motor. So motorcycles are let's say, the things which bring men and women together, which shall bring Sweeney to Mrs. Porter in the spring. And about Sweeney, oh, the moon shone bright on Mrs. Porter and on her daughter. They washed their feet in soda water. T.S. explains that maybe this is an allusion to a poem or to a lyric related to Sydney, Australia, but we know that this was actually a song or a ballad. The Australian soldiers were reciting, and the figure of Sweeney is a recurring figure in T.S. Eliot's poetry. Sweeney is the figure of vulgar, thoughtless, sexual enterprise of figures in Eliot's Sweeney Among the Nightingales and Sweeney Agonistes. And this is how Sweeney's and Mrs. Porter's are meeting one another. Sweeney goes there by a motorcycle, and Mrs. Porter is making herself ready. And these soda water, the motorcycle, may be considered as lustful kind of signs. And we have a sentence in French. I don't dare to read the French part, but anyway, elle was voix d'enfant chantant dans la couple. This is a reference to Percival, and Percival is an important figure in the Grail story. And if you remember, Grail is an important symbol in Wasteland and the story of the Fisher King. The Grail is a marker or a sign of fertility because of its cup shape. Describe Percival, the questing knight. He was one of those knights who was in search of the Holy Grail, resisting all sensual temptations to keep himself pure for the Grail. So, and heal the Fisher King. And this figure, Percival, appears in Wagner's opera. Wagner's Percival had his feet washed before entering the castle of the Grail. So we see that at the time of Percival, water was used to purify yourself from your temptations, your passions, and your lustfulness. But here, water is used for the contrary purpose, and that's why maybe we are in the wasteland. And we have the repetition of the sounds of the bears, tweet, 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 jug, 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 so rudely for stereo. And here we have another reference to the story of Procne, Philemola, and King Terio. Terrio raped Philemon, and then he cut her tongue so that she cannot narrate her story to others. And then the gods turned her into a nightingale, and the sad music of the nightingale is actually the sad voice of that girl narrating her sad story. This is the second time we have a reference to this story in the wasteland, and and later on Perkney was also turned into a dove, because and we have the sound of a dove and the sound of a nightingale here. In the story, in the second part, when we have a reference to this story, it is in the second part of the poems. Therefore, it is related to betrayal. Cheria had actually betrayed Procne, but here we have the repetition of the story because it also shows the lustfulness of the king and, let's say, the reluctance, or even we can say the hatred or something of Philemon. So that's why we have the story references to the story till this point twice in the poem and in two different parts. There would be another one in the fifth part, in the conclusive image of the poem, because it is an important image in the poem. In the conclusion, we have this as well. And we have again a reference to the unreal city. And we know, based on the conventions, internal conventions of the poem of the wasteland, that until this point, whenever we have the unreal city, it is London. Under the brown fog of a winter noon, Mr. Eugenides, the Smyrna merchant, so in London, which was a metropolitan city at the time, and many merchants, many businessmen, many ships actually considered London as their central location were in there. We have also Mr. Eugenides, the Smyrna merchant. Smyrna is the old name of Izmir, which is a port in Turkey. So Mr. Eugenides from Turkey, unshaven with a pocket full of currants. Currants means dried dates or other dried fruit. People in the Middle East actually eat lots of dried fruit. So this is not maybe specific to Turkey or Izmir or the Smyrna merchant of the poem, but in Iran also people do that, or in some other parts of the Middle East. So this is a kind of convention, but the point is not only is the showing of the specific geographical location from which Mr. Eugenides is coming, and we have another part of the world also added to the wasteland. So we have another form or another moment for the extension of the city. He has dried fruit in his pockets, and we can say that in the wasteland the fruits are also dried, and that is the point. And the dried fruit can be a sign of the wasteland and a sign of the lack of reproduction. And this part we have actually a narrative about a relationship, a lustful relationship which ends up nowhere. Let's read the next lines of the poem, and we will see CIF London. As he's a merchant and documents at side, he has a kind of a packet of documents and his in front of his eyes, on the table somehow, or something like that. On the pocket is written, or over the documents it is written CIF London, which is abbreviation for carriage and insurance free to London. So it seems that Mr. Eugenides is in there for business purposes, but maybe for some other purposes. Asked me, maybe the speaker of the poem, who is uh, my many references, T.S. Eliot, or a man anyway, in demotic French, in colloquial French, to luncheon at the Cannon Street Hotel, followed by a weekend at the Metropole. It doesn't seem to be something bad, okay? He's asking him for a good weekend, but it's not so. These places are not named accidentally in the poem. Metropole is a luxury hotel in the seaside resort of Brighton. Cannon Street Hotel near the station, that was then chief terminus for travelers to the continent, was a favorite meeting place for business people going or coming from abroad. It was also a local for homosexual liaisons. So we have a couple here whose relationship, by no means, at least at the time the poem is written, would end up in a marriage. So that is the case. We have another unsuccessful kind of a relationship. And from this point on, the series of the narratives of lustful couples continues in the poem. So this was the first one, the case of Mr. Eugenides and the persona of the poem. Two men cannot produce children in the world of the wasteland. Oh, okay, this is very long. Let me explain it. Or you can read it by yourself, but I will provide the explanation anyway. If you're back to Ovid's story of, and one of the stories in Ovid's Metamorphosis, and the story of Tiresias, the fortune teller or the prophet, at the time of let's say, for example, Oedipus or the ancient Greek times. Or the Greek mythology, we can say in general. Tiresias one day he was passing somewhere and he saw two snakes who were making love or copulating, and he watched them. So he was cursed and he was turned into a woman. The curse was like that. It worked like that. 7 years passed, and one day again he saw the same couple of the snakes doing the same thing. So he in order to turn back into a man, he washed them again, and okay, this happened. He turned into a man. But the parts of the female body remained in him. For example, he had breasts, but wrinkled breasts. So he turned into a man this time. One day, Hera and Zeus, or Jove and Juno, if you use the Roman terms or the Greek terms, they were fighting over a topic. The topic was which gender or sex is actually more lustful, more passionate. So back to the topic of the third part of the poem. Hera believed the answer is men, and Zeus believed the answer is women. They asked Tiresias as a referee because he had experienced both being a man and a woman, so he was a perfect judge for the situation. And when Tiresias came to their place, he told them, okay, I agree with Zeus. Women are more passionate. So Hera was angry and he made Tiresias blind. And don't forget that in mythology, no god can undo what another god has done, but they can compensate. So Zeus told Tiresias, I cannot turn your and give actually your eyes back, your eyesight back, but I can give you another power to see by your head. So the eye of his head is opened by Zeus, and therefore he can see the future. The figure of Tiresias, as we will see, is very important and in the wasteland because of his relation to both sexes and because of his interpretation. We have at this part of the poem, which brings forth another narrative of lostfulness in a couple. At the violet hour, which is a reference to the sunset, when the eyes and back turn upward from the desk, when the human engine waits like a taxi, throbbing, waiting, the last minutes at work, when you're passionate to go back, I, Tiresias, though blind, throbbing between two lives, old man with wrinkled female breasts, we know that story, can see at the violet hour, the evening hour, that strives homeward and brings the sailor home from sea, the typist home at tea time. So we see a typist girl who is getting back home. And the job of a typist is not accidentally chosen here by Eliot because it's a mechanical job. The typist home, and we have a mechanical kind of, or we are going to see a kind of mechanical relationship between a man and a woman. Home at tea time, clears her breakfast, uh, so everything is messy, maybe at her home and untidy, lights her stove and lays out food in teens. And food in teens is also important because it shows the saturated kind of life they are experiencing in there. The nature of this food, she's a typist who eats food in tins. Out of the window, perilously spread her drawing combinations, perilously, carelessly, or let's say she's showing off in a very dangerous way her combinations, which means her underwear. So her underwear is on the watch, on the show, everyone can see them, touched by the sun's last rays. And they are drying. A drying underwear can also be a reference to the wasteland. Once again, the lack of sexuality. On the divan, or the lack of passion for a relationship in this girl, on the divan or divan, which is this, actually a bed, which can be also a canopy. On the divan are piled at night her bed, stockings, and this is the way of her untidy home. And this is a familiar image that there are some people who today there are some people who put their dresses, everything over their bed, and when at night they want to sleep, they just put everything over the chair. And in the morning, when they want to use the chair, they turn everything back to their original place, which is the bed. So the woman is doing the same thing. Stockings, slippers, camisoles, and stays. All these things are gathered, piled up on her bed. I, Tiresias, old man with wrinkled dogs, which means breasts, perceived the scene and foretold the rest. I too awaited the expected guest. So I saw, because I know the future, I knew that there is someone expected who is her boyfriend. And he comes. He, the young man, carbuncular, arrives, a small house agent's clerk. He's a small house agent's clerk, so he's not that much proficient. With one bold stare, but he's too confident, though he doesn't have a good job, maybe. One of the law on whom assurance sits as a silk hat on a Bradford millionaire. I was listening to an interview. The former head of the English bank was talking about this part. He explained that Bradford was a place in which all of a sudden a group of merchants of the tapestry or something clothes gathered, and they were all nouveau riche or newly riches, and they wore hats, or they wore attires which showed that they are rich, but culturally speaking, or from their essence, we can say that they were not, let's say, they were not from the nature, or they did not belong to the upper classes. So the guy is also like that. He shows off something which is much greater than he actually is. The time is now propitious. Propitious means, okay, proper. As he guesses, the meal is ended. She's bored and tired. He starts, endeavors to engage her in caresses, but still are unreproved, if undesired. Flushed and decided, he assaults. It's like a rape. He assaulted. We had the story of the rape of Philemon, and then here he assaults at once, exploring hands encounter no defense. His vanity requires no response because of the lack of the balance in the relationship, and makes a welcome of indifference. So the formula of the wasteland: an undesired relationship, fruitless love, no children, the wasteland. And I, Tiresias, have for Salvador enacted on the same divan or bed because I was also this woman. I was all women. I was all men. I who have sat by Thebes below the wall, and this is a reference to the story of Oedipus, and who was the king. Oedipus was the king of the Thebes, and the Thebes in which Oedipus and Creon were living was also a wasteland because of what Oedipus had done unconsciously or unaware. Oedipus had killed his father and married his own mother, and well, they had four children. And Oedipus at first was, and they said that the wasteland or the calamity in the country is because someone, a guy, a man, had killed his father and married his mother. So um, Oedipus at first, regardless of his own relationship, and Jocasta, of the queen of Thebes, was searching, but and then he asked Tiresias to come, and Tiresias, the fortune teller, the prophet, told him that don't search. Actually, you're the case, and he was angry. But by the way, Tiresias was right. And here we see one of his prophecies, one of his most important prophecies has come true. So maybe this one is also true. And don't forget that the case of Oedipus and Jocasta and their children is also related to the story. It's another failed relationship, and after the death of the woman and Oedipus blinding himself, uh, there was a fight between their two sons, and Antigone also was killed by Creon. So all their children lost their lives in a way and walked among the lowest of the dead. And then after his death, Tiresias went to Hades. And Odyssey, if you remember in the story of Odyssey, just went there to take some advice. Bestows one final, we're back to the story. So the parenthesis showed us the digression from the story of the girl and the boy to the story of Tiresias. Bestows, and walked among the lords of the dead. So bestows one final patronizing kiss and gropes his way, finding the stairs unlit. And the stairs are unlit, so he's maybe going to the underworld. She turns and looks a moment in the glass, hardly aware of her departed lover. Her brain allows one half-formed thought to pass. Well, now that's done, and I'm glad it's over. And this is not how a relationship should be in the wasteland. And in the world of the wasteland, a proper one is not a standard relationship, shouldn't be like this. When lovely woman stoops to folly and paces about her room again, and this is a reference to the novel The Vicar of Wakefield, if I'm not mistaken, by Oliver Goldsmith. In that story, and we have another woman who was in an unwanted relationship like this woman, and she was just moving in the room as doing the woman now. Alone, she smoothed her hair with automatic hand. Automatic hand. Her movements are not natural or controlled, intentional ones, and puts a record on the gramophone to forget what has happened to her. And I told you we will be back to the story of the Fisher King and the fishman who was fishing there, and the part and it is marked. It is shown by turning back to the Tempest. The next line, the Tempest, line 48. The line is from Ferdinand's speech. This music crept by me upon the waters, continuing after weeping again the king, my father's wrack. And along the strand up Queen Victoria Street, so we have another part of the address behind the gas house and along the Strand, up Queen Victoria Street, some locations in London. Oh, city, I can sometimes hear beside a public bar in Lower Thames Street the pleasant whining of a mandolin. A mandolin looks like this and it sounds like this. clatter and chatter from within, where fishermen lounge at noon. So we hear a variety of sounds in the wasteland. London, which is maybe the center, the capital of the wasteland, where the walls of Magnus Martyr hold inexplicable splendor of Ionian white and gold. He's talking about this location. The fishermen are working here, as you can see, and here we have the Magnus Martyr by the side of the river. And what about this Ionian white and gold? He's talking about the interior design of this church, which is a combination of white and gold. So he becomes too detailed about places. And in this part, we have the Song of the Three Thames Daughters. Actually, this song is related to the Song of the Rhine Daughters or the Rhine Maidens in one other Wagner opera, Götterdämmerung, or The Twilight of the Gods. In that opera, the Rhine maidens are mourning, or they are actually lamenting the loss of the beauty of the river. And here, the daughters of London, or Thames daughters, as two sister rivers, for example, are doing the same thing. And in this way, again, T.S. Eliot is expanding and extending his wasteland to other locations. And also, we can say that wherever we are in the wasteland, we can hear the same sound. The girls sing "The Girls of the River." The river sweats oil and tar, so the Thames daughters are also complaining about the same thing. The barges drift with the turning tide red sails. We see the movement of the ships and the boats wide to leeward, swing on the heavy spar. The barges wash drifting logs down Greenwich Reach past the Isle of Dogs. He means this part. Suppose or imagine that we are on a boat with the Thames daughter and we're moving in the river. And here we have the Greenwich and what is called the Royal View. And on the other side, we have the Isle of Dog. So we are here now. Past the Isle of Dogs, Vaila, Vailala, Lia, Valala, Leilala is actually part of the song of the Rhine daughters, and we have the commingling of the two sounds of the Thames daughters and Rhine daughters. Oh, sorry, we can listen to it. I like this. And here we read about the Thames daughter actually sing about the unsuccessful and failed relationship, or the fruitless relationship of Queen Elizabeth and the Earl of Leicester. The Earl of Leicester was later on killed by Queen Elizabeth on loyalty accounts. Queen Elizabeth thought that Leicester wants to assassinate her. Elizabeth and Leicester beating oars, but here we read about a part in which they were still in love, beating oars. Leicester was a possible husband for Queen Elizabeth. Elizabeth the first, of course. Beating oars, the stern was formed, a gilded chill made out of gold, red and gold. This is a royal boat in a way. The brisk swell rippled both shores. They are using oars, so the water is moving towards both sides of the river. Rippled both shores. Southwest wind carried downstream the peal of bells. White towers, way lala laya, way lala lay lala, like this. Okay. And from here, the Thames daughter are singing one by one. So we have a quotation mark, and this is the first Thames daughter talking or singing, let's say. Trams and dusty trees, Highbury bore me. So we're moving alongside the river. Highbury bore me. Highbury he is here, which is one of the most luxurious places in London. So Highbury has nothing to her to entertain her. Richmond and Kew, another, actually luxury locations in London. Richmond is a kind of river resort, and many tourists go there every year. And the famous Kew Gardens of London. Richmond and Kew undid me. They are not interesting because even if even if these are the most beautiful places on earth, they are part of the wasteland. So they are boring. They are undoing you. By Richmond, these scenes are so boring that by Richmond, I raised my knees supine like this on the floor of a narrow canal. So I preferred not to look at. There was nothing for me, which was interesting. And the second Thames daughter is also singing here. My feet are at Moorgate. Moorgate was a station in which it was actually a cross station. The underground and the trains met there. And T.S. Eliot, when he was a bank clerk, many times, it was on his way, so he had seen the place. So from the beauties of Richmond, Kew Gardens, Highbury, we moved to the Moorgate and my heart under my feet. This is the Thames daughter, but it can also be a reference to Queen Elizabeth and Earl of Leicester. And under my feet, we have again those layered images. After the event, he wept. He promised a new start. I made no comment. What should I resent? A failed relationship. And this part shows the third Thames daughter who is singing, and we have the penultimate part of the poem, part of the third part of the poem, which is related to that prior sermon we saw at the title. On Margate Sands, now we are somewhere else. On Margate Sands, where the Thames River and the sea meet, then it is another place where tourists go. On Margate Sands, I can connect nothing with nothing. Do you remember? If you remember, in the second part, we have this: do you know nothing? Do you think nothing? And here we see that the Thames daughter says, "I can connect nothing with nothing," and this is the condition of wasteland. The broken fingernails of dirty hands, my people, humble people who expect nothing. And it can be Queen Elizabeth talking. Well, Lala, and with this Lala, the whole song of the third Thames daughter actually ends. And we have this part: to Carthage, then I came. This is a reference to the Confessions of Saint Augustine, where he has a youth in which he had done many lustful things. So Saint Augustine was not a saint from the very beginning. He actually turned away from his licentious youth to a devoted old man. And when there he was in Carthage, and many girls were in his life. To Carthage then I came, we are reading quote unquote from his confessions, where a cauldron of unholy loves, prostitutes maybe, sang all about my knees, and another sign of lustfulness. And don't forget that Carthage can also be a reference to the story of Enid and Dido. The story in Enid, the story of Queen Dido, she was the queen of Carthage, and Aeneas was the last remaining member of Troy. so he wanted to go to establish a new city somewhere else, and he established Rome. But on his way to Rome, based on Christopher Marlowe's play, he met Cartha and the Queen of Carthage, Dido. They had a happy time together, but it was another lustful relationship ending nowhere. After a while, Anya remembered his own goals, so he told Dido that I can no more continue this relationship, and he left. Dido made a pile, or let's say a hill, a pyre of what Anya had given her as gifts, and it became a high tea kind of thing. So she moved up, and from that height, she jumped to earth, and then she killed herself. So we have another multi-layer image here in this part, and we have four repetitions of the word burning, 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 burning. This is the passion get more and more into lost, burning, 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 burning. This is its nature. O Lord, thou pluckest me out. We are listening to Saint Augustine again, and this burning, 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 burning is a reference to the fire sermon of Buddha. And this is not accidental here that we see Saint Augustine and Buddha together, a Western saint and an Eastern prophet. Maybe both of them talking about the same thing. So we have the unity of the images in the poem. Oh Lord, thou pluckest me out. So he's asking God to save him from here, from this lustfulness. Oh Lord, thou pluckest, burning. And this second burning is not a reference to lustfulness. This is the fire which purges you from your sins. And this is also a reference to Dante's Divine Comedy. In Dante's Divine Comedy, in the Inferno, people are burning anyway, one way or another. But in the Purgatorial, we see that the people are burning for a purpose. They are purifying. Purgatorial is related to the word we use in English, purgation. So they are purifying themselves. So the first fire is the infernal fire. The second burning is related to that purgation. And we, from this point on, we see that we can move in the wasteland from Inferno of Dante, and we had a reference to Dante's Inferno in the first part, to this purgatorial kind of representation. So this was my explanation of the third part of the wasteland. I hope you've enjoyed actually this video, and I hope I can see you in my next videos.